So it's about cells. And we're not made of one cell. We're not made of two. We're not made of three. We're not made of 10,000. Right? Every year it seems to change. As of 2 or 3 years ago, we were up to 8 trillion cells. Now think about the number trillion. A trillion is 1,000 billion.
Pretty big.
That's pretty big. And you know that's kind of too big. If you had $1 trillion, that's a lot of money. But now they're saying anywhere from 13 to 35 trillion cells we find in our body. How many cells do you think we started out as?
One.
Okay, one. We started out as one. To like 35 trillion, if that's a true number. They're never going to know. You can't count it. That's impossible. But they're like 250 different types of cells in our body that all have different functions. And so we start with one, we go into 256 different kinds, and roughly that number, and then we end up with 13 trillion. Okay, now here's our favorite guy here. Now, if he were any more cells than you or I, at first look, you're going to go, oh yeah, this guy, he's going to have more cells. But on the average, a human being has the same amount of cells as another human being. His are just bigger. He's made some of them bigger. A lot of, if he were real, okay, he's kind of disturbing, so I've got to change it. He's going to have about the same amount. But here's a Colombian mammoth. This is the biggest elephant that ever roamed.
I saw one.
Yeah, they got them in museums. They're not alive anymore. It's a mammoth. I guess it's not really. It belongs to the same class as an elephant. It's huge. Look at that. Average 6-foot guy. That thing is way bigger than most semis.
Yeah, look at that.
Do you think its cells are big?
Yes.
At first glance, you say, "Oh yeah, it's a bigger thing, so it's got bigger cells." But here's the secret. Its cells can't be any bigger than yours or mine, because if it gets too big, then it can't get food to where it needs to fast enough. It'll die. So yeah, it has more cells than we do, but its cells are the same size. Think about a whale. Think about a dinosaur. No, cells aren't super huge. They're small, and they got to be for a general rule. Okay. Now, I'm not a big science guy, famous scientist, but here's 2 guys you need to know. 2 test questions. And you think about this. 1838, we had developed the microscope was newly, and you had to hold it in your hand like this. The microscope was made out of brass. You had to hold it up to the sunlight, and then you could look in there. In 1838, a guy named Matthew Sliden looked at plants and discovered, whoa, wow, what are these? And he discovered cells. Now this plant, what you see is Elodea. This is a water plant, but you see all those little green circles inside? If you could put this in motion, these would be circling like this. They just flow. But those are chloroplasts. That's where the site where photosynthesis takes place. Your clue is the color. Chloroplasts are green. Chloroplasts are green. Okay. Now, not to leave animals out. A year later, same thing. Got that fancy microscope now, and he put it up to the sun. And a guy named Theodore Schwann, and I believe he looked at blood. Animal blood. So he was the first guy to ever see an animal cell. I put a cheek cell there just because that's what your lab is today. We're going to look at cheek cells. Okay? So this guy discovered animal cells. Now, in 7th grade, Mrs. Zacher, you guys looked at those, right? You guys remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. And so you can see it has a membrane. You can see it right here. It's a barrier. What's that part right there at the center? The controller. Starts with an N. Nucleus. And then you can see some other things. These black dots here, those are probably bacteria. You can't really see much else. I know this says here that it's mitochondria, but those are going to be probably out of the rule here with that kind of a stain.
His name.
That one?
Yes.
So that's an animal cell. Okay, questions? Gonna move on. Let me know if I'm going too fast. Okay, so here come some rules. Okay, rules. Now this is called cell theory. The word theory should tell you that it probably could change at any time. But as we know cells, living things are made up of cells, like cars. I know some of you said cars were alive because they moved or they needed fuel. But when you get down to it, they're not made of cells, they're not alive. Car is not made up of cells. It's got to be made up of cells before it's alive. Okay, so that's the first part of that test question. Second one. Cells are the basic unit of living things. Now, some of you came up yesterday during the puzzle and you were asking me a question very similar to this, and I pointed to the blocks that make up the wall. See the blocks? The school is made of a whole lot of blocks, but if you put all the blocks together, you get the structure. And so when it says it's the basic unit of structure, that's what it means. It just means that, hey, you add them all up, they're stuck together, and they're placed in a certain place. That's the structure. Now the function. Get this. So we have over 200 different cell types. You got blood cells, you got skin cells, you got all kinds of things. One of the coolest things I ever witnessed in college, they took 2 heart cells from a mouse, right? And together they had them in a solution that kept them alive, and they were doing this. They were beating, right? Because isn't that what a heart does? From the time even before you're born, it's sitting there, it's contracting. And it does that, I think it was like 3 billion times in your lifetime. But they took out 2 cells and they were together and they were contracting just like this. And then they took like a needle and they separated them out, and then the cells stopped. And then all of a sudden you see them start doing this. That's their function. The cell's function is to contract, and that's what they did. And they were not in together. They were not lined up. One would be doing this and this and this, and when they put them back together and they touched, movement stopped. And then it was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And so that's why that heart contracts like that. That's the function. Red blood cells, all they do is capture oxygen. They contain hemoglobin, protein that binds oxygen, and it helps us get rid of CO2. But that's their function. So that's one of the things. They're the basic unit of it. Okay? And then new cells come from existing ones. All right? Good. Got to get serious here. Watch this. We started out as one cell, and then we got more. So if you need to replace some cells or you need to heal, new cells have to come from old ones. Okay, look up in this general area. I'll see if I still have any. If you're way back, you probably can't see it. But if you're up close, what do you see floating around? You see the little particles floating around up here? Skin cells, right? In your house, they might call it dust. You ever have to dust your house? And you got to wipe up all the dust. The TV gets dusty. That's skin cells. Now there's some dust, like dirt, like you would think. There's some, there might be some fuzz, stuff like that. But it's mainly skin cells. Think about this. If a bacteria lands on your skin and it starts to grow and multiply, you don't want it sitting there. Your skin comes up with a way it's like, okay, there's a bacteria there. No, don't worry about it. Next thing you know, that skin cell dies. And it flakes off and it flies away. So when you breathe in dust, you're breathing in skin cells. If you have a cat or a dog in your house, you probably are a dust to your house because they give off a lot. A lot. The number is that we lose 40,000 skin cells a minute. So like if you're wearing long sleeves, it's catching there. You get the idea. Okay, so these skin cells, once they flake off, they got to be replaced, and this is happening all the time. So if you're losing 40,000 every minute, you're probably gaining 40,000 every minute. That's just the way it works. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay, last thing. And then we're going to get in our lab. Now, it doesn't matter if it's a dog cell, a bacteria. It doesn't matter if it's an elephant cell, an amoeba. Amoeba is like a big one-celled organism. Every cell that's alive has three things in common. You got to know them. It's just like basic stuff. What all cells have in common. They're surrounded by a membrane. So when you look at your cheek cells today, you're going to see an outline of the membrane. You know, think of throwing a water balloon. You put water in the balloon expands. What's holding it in is that membrane, right? And if you throw it at somebody, you break the membrane, that splashes the water on. That's great. This wall separates my room from Mrs. Yeager's. And so the membrane actually kind of keeps that cell together, keeps it separate from other cells. So like my room and her room, it's separated by a block wall. That's the whole idea for a membrane. Plus it has to be able to control what goes in and what goes out. And we'll get into that. Also, it's got to have DNA. Let's say we want to clone Lars. So they're going to take Lars, they're going to lay him out on a table, they're going to probably knock him out, and they're going to take this big needle, and they're going to shove it right down in through his belly, into where we find the intestines. And they're going to go for that tissue that holds the intestines together, because it's pristine in there, it's perfect. Did you guys know, and I didn't know this until my sister-in-law told me. She's was a surgical nurse. And so the doctor instructed her, come over here and grab this man's intestines. So she came over and grabbed him, and she pulled him way up and out. Just like this. And the doctor said, okay, drop him. And then went right back into place. That would be awesome, wouldn't it? You just pick a guy, just pull it by and go.
Yeah, dude woke up out of surgery. Oh, it feels
Now you probably didn't even know anything, but anyways, what's holding it is that is going to be that tissue that we're going after to clone Mars. That's what kind of holds it all into place. And pretty cool. It's pretty gross, but it's pretty cool. And so, if we want to clone, we want to go after his DNA. So every cell has DNA. Now, one exception. A red blood cell doesn't have DNA, but when it's young, it does. So it falls into the category. Okay? And then ribosomes. Okay, I want you to circle this word, ribosomes. Okay, circle the word ribosomes. Circle the word ribosomes. Let's say we want to go lift weights, and you get sore and you want to get bigger muscles. Well, your body's got to start making protein to replace the muscles and repair. These are the places, this is the sites where protein is made. Every cell has them. Okay, you need to know that. If you circled it, I want you to write out here, place where protein is made. You could even say the site where protein is made. There's lots of them. Cells have thousands and thousands and thousands of ribosomes in them. You got to. You got to have that many. Okay, so surrounded by a membrane, contain DNA, and they all have ribosomes. All have ribosomes. Bacteria, even they got to have protein. They got to have a way to make it. Ribosomes. So you got to know that.